Welcome to Time to Talk OT. In this video, we are going to be considering how occupational therapy students can develop their critical writing skills and why critical writing is important for practitioners beyond their university assignments. So, what is critical writing? Critical writing is a way of academic writing that goes beyond summarizing information and instead relies upon the intentional consideration of the quality of the writing. It uses a wide range of techniques, encouraging people to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses, question the assumptions, synthesize ideas from multiple sources, think about the subject beyond what is written, explore arguments and counter-arguments for the strengths and weaknesses, and also consider how the context has influenced the writing and its relevance to the reader's position. In order to help demonstrate how critical appraisal is important to your role as an occupational therapist and an occupational therapy practitioner, I'm going to present two fictional scenarios. First, Simon has an appointment with an occupational therapist to talk about how his lower back pain is making it harder for him to engage in meaningful occupations. In preparation for meeting Simon, the occupational therapist has looked at research which offers strategies to help people with lower back pain continue driving. During their conversation, Simon mentions that he doesn't drive regularly as he shares his car with his partner and he is able to work from home. Additionally, Simon states that his lower back pain is not aggravated when driving or sitting in the car, and instead it is made worse when he plays badminton, goes for a jog, or sits on the floor with his children. The occupational therapist thinks they've wasted their time reading about strategies to support people with lower back pain to continue driving. In the second scenario, we've got Simon, who has an appointment with an occupational therapist to talk about how his lower back pain is making it harder for him to engage in meaningful occupations. In preparation for meeting Simon, the occupational therapist has looked at research which offers strategies to support people with lower back pain continue driving. During their conversation, Simon mentions that he does not drive regularly and his lower back pain is not aggravated when driving. Whilst the research the occupational therapist read was not directly linked to the occupations that Simon finds challenging, the occupational therapist still thinks that the research is useful. The research talked about how important it was to consider the bodily movements when transitioning from getting in and out of the car. The occupational therapist thinks that this could be useful to consider when looking at the occupations that Simon finds challenging, for example, sitting on the floor with his children. In these two examples, we see that the occupational therapist's engagement in a critical appraisal of the research allowed them to look beyond the limitations of the research, which might have caused other occupational therapists to disregard it. And instead they've been able to consider how the research can be used in relation to Simon's specific circumstances. Whilst many people may be able to descriptively understand and evaluate the usefulness of a piece of research based on the subject relevance, for instance, sometimes it is harder to respond to the unique lived experiences of clients with creativity and using critical appraisal. We are going to be considering some ways you can scaffold your critical writing. Whilst this presentation will be talking about critical writing in relation to research papers, the suggestions provided can help you approach anything that you want to critically appraise. The first step is to look for the quick things. These are often not included in the body of the research paper or article, but are instead found on the title page. You can look to see if the research has been peer-reviewed. This means that a team of researchers have read the paper before it has been published and have agreed that the research is of a good enough standard to be published. Secondly, you can look to see if the research is open access. This is a really important thing for many occupational therapists, as it means that consumers of research don't have to pay to read it. Next, you can consider the impact factor. This is a statistic which tells you how often the research published in the journal has been cited in another published research paper. Whilst there are some fantastic research papers, including in journals that are often disregarded and have low impact factors, this, considering the impact factor, can help you assess the esteem of the research paper and the journal it was published in. You could also consider when the research was published. In order for the research to be representative of the lived experiences of populations you are seeking to apply the research to, aka the people who are alive today, it needs to be published in the last 20 years or so. There will obviously be some exemptions, for example, research which introduces theories that haven't changed, but for research to be considered contemporary, look for research that is published as near to the year you're writing in as possible. Finally, you can look at where the research was published. This could be the journal of the research, but it also includes the country the research was published in. This can give you important clues about whether the research is open access, peer-reviewed, and the possible limitations of the representativeness of the sample in relation to the population you are seeking to understand. Now, we are going to move on to 5 different types of questions that you can ask yourself to help approach critical writing. So first we've got how questions. You can ask yourself, how have they come to this conclusion? Consider if the sample is representative. Are the procedures relevant and well described? Next, you could look at, how does it work? Are you able to understand what the researcher has done? And has the research achieved the aims? Thirdly, you can look at, how does the research fit into the topic? Does the research link to the literature presented in the introduction? Are the questionnaires and measurements used in the research accurate ways to understand the topic of the research? Next is why questions. You can ask yourself, why did this occur? Why did they choose this population sample? Why did they use this questionnaire? Why did they ask these questions? You could also have a look at, why is this the conclusion? Did the findings indicate anything different to what they said in the conclusion? Are the results clearly linked to the conclusion? Is the writer biased in the way they have framed the conclusion? Are they suggesting that the results are more important than they actually are? What if questions. What if this is wrong? What if they used a more in-depth measure? Would the results still be the same? What if they could have come to the wrong conclusion? How does this impact the validity and reliability of the research? What if there is a problem? How does it change the importance of the results if there is not ethical approval or informed consent? What if something was changed? Would the research be better if it included or didn't include service users in the research design process? So what questions? So what does this mean? How can the research be applied to practice? What does the research really tell you? Is the research even relevant to what you're thinking about? Why is the research significant? Does this research change anything? Does it go against or build on anything that was previously believed? Does this research help you understand a group of people better? Finally, is the research convincing? Does it have a representative sample? Has a rigorous research process? Is it well written? And is the data open access? What next questions? Is the research transferable? Can you apply the findings of the research process to someone in a different country who speaks a different language, someone of a different age, level of experience, gender, ethnicity, social class, sexuality, etc.? What can we learn from the research? What are the good things we can learn from the research? What are the things that we can learn to avoid from this research paper? And what needs doing next? How can the research be expanded further? Does the research need to look at anyone else's experiences? We are now going to use those scaffolding questions and try and look at how we can apply it to the critical exploration of a research paper. So I highly recommend here that you just pause the video, check out this research paper, have a read through and kind of think how you would apply those questions yourself, because that's what we're going to be doing together now. So the article we are going to be critically evaluating together has been published by the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy. In the title of this journal lies our first clue. This journal is open access. This means that you don't have to pay to read what is published. This is a fantastic thing as it means the research is accessible to practitioners who might not have the resources that allow them to buy research that is relevant to their work or interests. Knowing the title of the journal also helps me understand a bit about the publication process. For example, all the research that is published in the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy has been peer-reviewed and is therefore considered relevant, credible and ethical by other researchers. The second clue we can identify is that the research was published in October 2024. As this video was created in December 2024, we can see that the research is modern and is likely to reflect the contemporary circumstances of the world. Finally, we have the authors. Some journals provide links to a bit more information about the authors than just the name, but this is not the case in this paper. Nonetheless, it is useful to just Google the researchers. You could consider, are they qualified to write this paper about occupational therapy? What interest have they previously shown in this topic? This can be really helpful to understanding the credibility and positionality of the researchers and the research they are presenting. A quick Google search reveals that Christine Hughes, the primary researcher, is the Director of Rehabilitation and an occupational therapist who has worked with older adults for 8 years. Going forward, when reading this paper, it might be worth considering where the research has taken place. We can see that it's looking at the experiences of rehabilitation therapists in long-term care facilities, but do we know if it's the same one Christine's the director of? And if so, how might this have impacted the results? So we're going to look at how questions first. How does it work? Well, the research has done what it said. The research explored the experiences of stress and burnout of a range of therapeutic practitioners, including speech therapists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, and occupational therapy assistants. They seem to have done a pretty good job. So, why is this the conclusion? If you've read it, you will notice that the conclusion seemed to focus on the perspective of management. It says at one stage, if staff perceived their leadership as adequate or provided a stress buffer, they felt protected from burnout. Whilst this is a perfectly valid point of conclusion, it was the first thing that was reported on. Typically, the first thing in a conclusion is considered the most significant finding. However, this was just one of the many different experiences that were reported by the participants. Considering who the author is, the Director of Rehabilitation and Occupational Therapy at a similar institution to the one the participants were working at, it seems that the way the research has been framed and reported, and the findings reported, reflect the subjective experiences and personal interests of the researcher. This detracts from the quality of the research, as the findings of importance to those reading the article are considered secondary to the things that the researcher has found important. What if this is wrong? Well, there are a couple of things that we can notice that might not have been right. The primary researcher was the Director of Rehabilitation and Occupational Therapy at a long-term care facility. Interestingly, there was not a section that was considered the positionality of the researcher. This would have helped to understand the researcher's role and how it might have influenced the way the research was approached. It is possible that the researcher's position of authority might have changed the openness within which the participants spoke about their experiences of burnout and stress. Similarly, some participants may have been aware of the potential risks of speaking openly about their experiences of stress and burnout. What if they wanted to get a job at the same place that the primary researcher was working? Would you have really wanted to be completely honest about your experience of stress and burnout? Another aspect of the research which is questionable was the questions focused heavily on the negative experiences of stress and burnout. There were limited opportunities for participants to talk about the aspects of their job that mitigated these experiences, and this led to a limited understanding of the holistic experiences of people working within these settings. Similarly, there was somewhat of a judgmental tone in the final question, which asked, how do you feel burnout could be prevented or better managed by therapists? This question might be perceived as attributing blame to therapists for experiencing burnout, despite the unique circumstances that might increase their risk of burnout and stress. This may have ostracized the participants and alienated them from the positive intentions of the research. It is also somewhat contrary to the aims of the study, which were to better understand the experiences of stress and burnout, as opposed to finding ways that stress and burnout could be prevented. What if something was changed? There are two things that the researcher could have done differently which may have impacted the way the research was presented and or the findings of the research. Firstly, the research did not consider the experience of nurses. This reduced the representativeness of the sample population, as nurses are one of the primary employees in long-term care facilities and are also likely to have experienced stress and burnout. Likewise, the participants were all recruited via social media groups. This may have limited the sample to the homogeneous group of people who use social media, and in doing so, experience of therapeutic practitioners working in these settings who do not have access or do not use social media have been disregarded. So, what does this mean? As explored earlier, it seems that the research was written for the interest of management and not to validate the experiences of practitioners. Whilst this may seem that this research can be more easily applied to changing and developing practices of management, it doesn't positively impact the experiences of practitioners to whose experiences the research was seeking to consider. It was noticeable that despite the participants mentioning strategies that they use to deal with stress and burnout, these were not considered as important aspects warranting discussion in the conclusion. This limits the usefulness of the research to supporting practitioners and validating their experiences of stress and burnout. So, why is this research significant? Well, I have to say the research isn't really that significant. It didn't seem to change anything or add anything to our understanding of burnout and stress that had not been previously considered by research. But is the research convincing? I think that the research was pretty convincing, considered a good range of experiences and diversity of views of people. The questions also explored different aspects of the person's experiences of stress and burnout, and the abundance of directly quoted qualitative data in the research paper helps the consumer of the research access and understand the experiences of the therapist directly. Next, is the research transferable? On the one hand, the research is pretty transferable. The research considered 4 different practitioners and therefore could be useful in understanding the experiences of these professionals. Similarly, the research looked at the experiences of therapists in different long-term care facilities. This means that different management systems and working environments were considered in the research, which means that it's more representative of different workplaces around the country. However, the research was focused only on the experiences of therapists working in long-term care facilities for people with memory difficulties. It is possible that the findings might have been different were other rehabilitation settings to have been explored. It would be unethical and very hard to transfer the research findings to different settings because the differences in clients and working environments may contribute differently to experiences of stress and burnout. What next? What needs doing now? In order to build on the research, it would be pertinent to consider the experiences of practitioners from different settings and maybe even in different countries. Similarly, it would be interesting for future research to focus on the empirical effectiveness of strategies to help reduce burnout, as this would help practitioners reduce their experiences of burnout in the future. Through exploring critical writing using these prompts, we have identified 19 different critical comments just from a single piece of research, and there are definitely some we didn't pick up on. When writing up about this research paper, I would not elaborate on every critical thing that I had identified. I might think about what I wanted to say. Was there something that I really thought they did well? Or was there something that really stood out for me? From my perspective, what stood out was the perspective of the researcher and how this influenced the write-up of the research. I might have to look and see if I can find another piece of research on this topic, complete an independent critical evaluation of that, and write it up comparatively. It might read something like this. Whilst both research paper A and research paper B have considered the experiences of practitioners from different professions and representing different institutions, the tone and positionality of the researcher in paper A reduces the perceptions of reliability of the research. The primary researcher was a director of rehabilitation and occupational therapy at a long-term care facility, not dissimilar to the institutions that participants in the study were working within. It is possible that the participants felt reluctant to speak freely about their experiences of stress and burnout because of their concerns of judgment, or that their honesty possibly might have a detrimental impact on future job prospects. Similarly, the researcher chose to formulate the conclusions through recommendations for managers, which may suggest their covert intentions of conducting the research were to understand the experiences of individuals like their employees. This emphasis detracts from the experiences of participants, which may be more accurately represented in the conclusions of the research paper B. This further detracts from the usefulness of research paper A, as instead of promoting understanding of the experiences of stress and burnout, the researcher presents the takeaways of the study to be about effective management strategies, which were not identified as part of the study's aim. One could also achieve critical appraisal and demonstrate criticality through more subtle means. For example, by simply identifying that the research is peer-reviewed, open access, has ethical approval, is or is not contemporary, does or does not have a participant sample that corresponds to the demographics of the population you are interested in, can all demonstrate that you have thought about the application of the research and considered the usefulness of the research for the argument and position you are making. I know that we have talked a lot today, so the PowerPoint used in this presentation can be found in the description section of the video. I encourage you to consider the questions we have explored today to scaffold your next piece of critical writing. The more you use these questions, the less you will actually need them. Thank you for watching this video from Time to Talk OT. I hope you have found it useful. If you have any suggestions for future content, please email timetotalkot@gmail.com.